Hello and welcome to an Anowon the Ruin Thief deck tech. I would rank this deck as high-powered, mainly because it has very powerful synergy and has a combo which will win the game. This combo is Dusk Mantle Guildmage and Mind Crank. Mind Crank, yeah. So the way this combo works is, first let me read Mind Crank. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into their graveyard. And Dusk Mantle Guildmage reads, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses one life. So what happens is that this sets on a loop. They mill one card into their graveyard, which then makes them lose a life, which then makes them mill another card, rinse and repeat until all of your opponents are dead. So that's not the only combo in this deck. We also have Dramatic Reversal plus Isochron Scepter, which we can use to make infinite mana, and then we could use something like Blue Sun Zenith as a win condition. Though Anowon is in Dimir colors, I do not think that he is CEDH viable, mainly because he mills your opponents, and with stuff like Gitrog running around and Breach decks running around, milling your opponents helps them a lot. So I do not think he's viable for that reason, but I do think he could be played in high power. This deck runs a lot of evasive rogues. And the goal of these rogues are to have some sort of ability and generate value off of Anowon. They can also pressure life totals and get a combat-based win if we cannot win via one of our combos. Since Anowon pumps them, that damage can add up, and Anowon also deals damage to them whenever they mill a card. Keeper of the Keys is also a very good card because it follows our sub-theme of Can't Be Blocked. Nimble Trapfinder follows that, so does Slitherblade and Marang Prowler and Ghostly Pilferer. We mainly have this sub-theme because sometimes it's hard to get in for creatures, and Anowon really relies on us getting in for the damage. And sure, he pumps your creatures, but that really isn't enough to get guaranteed damage in. A big difference between Anowon and Yuriko is that Yuriko helps you get creatures through via its ninjutsu ability, but with Anowon you have to run big stuff, which also is hard to block. That's why we have stuff like Soaring Thought Thief and other things with flying. Most creatures in this deck have to be evasive. We also have Bruvak the Grandiloquent. Even though he is not a rogue, he can mill your opponent, and this could double up on Anowon triggers and double up our card draw. We have Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, mainly if we're fighting an opponent's mill deck, or if somehow they counter our Thassa's Oracle, or counter our way to win. It's also just a very, very good card. Like, we have a lot of ramp, and being able to use him as a win, well, not a win condition, but as a big beater, which when we cast him, he will put us very far ahead. Even though he costs 10 mana, I think it's worth it. So we have Leyline of the Void in this deck, because if we're going up against an opponent who has a graveyard-themed deck, we cannot play our deck, because if we mill them, they will win, and they will get a lot of value. So the better play then would be to just try to wait until you find Leyline of the Void with our variety of tutors and card draw. Then not only is their strategy shut off, but you can mill them with or exile cards from their graveyard without having to worry. We also have a little bit of stacks in the form of Mystic Study and Propaganda. Teferi's Tutelage is another one of those cards which can kind of double up on Anowon triggers, because Anowon draws you a card, which then mills more. Teferi's Ageless Insight is mainly there to pair with Anowon and our other card draw spells to draw a lot more. Mr. Gamora, I think, belongs in every blue deck just because it costs 1 mana and draws a card, and I think it's actually debatably better than Mystic Study. Cover of Darkness is mainly to make some of our creatures which aren't a rogue, rogues. We also have a nice equipment package. Since we have a lot of evasive creatures, if we stick a sword onto them, we will get a lot of value. Sword of Body and Mind is also very good in this deck because it can help mill our opponents out, which is another one of our win conditions. I don't know if you've noticed yet, but this deck is very layered. If our opponent gets rid of one of our win conditions, we could try with another thing, or another win condition. Another way we value from milling our opponents is with Zareth Sand the Trickster, which can take our opponent's fetch lands and our opponent's creatures, which we milled via Anowon and other mill cards, and Mnemonic Betrayal, which is kind of like an opposite Yawgmoth's Will. We get to cast cards from their graveyard, and if we've been filling up their graveyards with mill, that could win us the game by stealing their win conditions. Kindred Domination is very good because most of our creatures are rogues, and this could just kill all of our opponent's creatures if we choose rogues, and this could also clear the way for us to swing in for the win. In Garrick's Wake is a little bit more expensive, but does the same thing. We also run Consecrated Sphinx, because even though it's not a rogue and costs 6 mana, it's just a very good card, because whenever they draw a card, you draw 2 cards, meaning that each round of the table, you're drawing 6 extra cards. We also run Fleet Swallower, which is an amazing mill card, because he could just mill like 30 or 40 cards from the top of your opponent's library. So the game plan of this deck is to have interaction, to cast rogues, and then play rogue payoffs like Anowon. Once you have Anowon out, you start digging for one of your combos, or try to mill or damage out your opponents, and try to interact and stop them from winning with some of our light stacks effects and some of our interaction package like Reality Shift and Pongify and Cyclonic Rift, Mana Drain, and Fierce Guardianship. This should be able to stave off your opponents until you can go for the win in a multitude of ways. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and please give me a like and subscribe.